There was a time when silence felt safer than love. Not because I stopped caring, but because caring had begun to hurt too much. There was a strange comfort in not answering calls, a quiet relief in not hearing familiar voices, a calm that settled in my chest when the phone remained silent. It confused me at first. How could distance feel safer than connection? How could absence bring more peace than presence? Every call tightened my chest. It was not fear, it was anticipation. The anticipation of emotional weight, the anticipation of tension, the anticipation of tension, the anticipation of needing to be strong again. Each ringing tone felt like a reminder that emotional labor awaited, that I would once again have to listen, absorb, soothe, fix, and reassure, that I would have to silence my own emotions to make space for someone else's. Every visit drained my soul. Before even stepping through the door, my body already felt exhausted. My breathing became shallow, my muscles tightened, my thoughts raced. I prepared myself the way one prepares before a storm, bracing for emotional impact, reminding myself to stay calm, to not react, to not escalate, to endure. Every conversation left me questioning my own worth. Why did I always feel smaller afterward? Why did my ulis feel inconvenient, always seem too much? Why did my needs feel inconvenient? Why did my boundaries feel selfish? I used to believe family was everything, that blood meant belonging, that love meant endurance, that loyalty meant silence, that sacrifice meant virtue. I believed pain was simply the price of love. I believed emotional exhaustion was normal. I believed being misunderstood was something to accept. But slowly, painfully, I realized something terrifying. Sometimes the people who create us are the same ones who quietly destroy us. Not intentionally, not always consciously, but through emotional neglect, through unresolved trauma, through unmet needs, through generational pain passed down without awareness. And sometimes, walking away is the only way to survive. Not out of hatred, not out of anger, but out of self-preservation, out of the desperate need to breathe, out of the longing to feel safe inside my own body, out of the hope that life could feel lighter than this. When love begins to feel heavy, expanded, there comes a moment in certain lives when love begins to feel heavier than hate. Not because the heart grows cold, but because it has been burned too many times while trying to stay warm. At first, love feels hopeful. It feels like possibility. It feels like longing. There is always a quiet belief that one day things will change, that one day understanding will arrive, that one day the emotional gap will finally close. But over time, hope becomes exhaustion. Conversations repeat themselves. The same misunderstandings cycle endlessly. The same emotional patterns replay like broken records. Apologies remain shallow. Change remains temporary. Growth remains absent. And slowly, love begins to hurt more than hate ever could. Because hate is clear. But love mixed with pain is confusing. Love mixed with negate creates self-doubt. Love mixed with emotional distance creates longing. Love mixed with criticism creates shame. This moment does not arrive suddenly. It builds quietly, in the pauses between conversations, when words hover unspoken because honesty feels unsafe. In the forced smiles, worn to keep peace, not because happiness exists. In the exhaustion that follows every attempt to explain feelings that are never truly heard. In the way the body tenses before family gatherings, as if preparing for emotional battle instead of emotional warmth. There was a time when I thought something was wrong with me. Why did simple interactions feel so overwhelming? Why did family time leave me drained instead of fulfilled? Why did love feel like obligation instead of safety? I watched others speak about family with warmth, nostalgia, comfort. They spoke of home as refuge. They described parents as protection. They remembered childhood as freedom. But my experience felt different. Home felt tense. Conversations felt heavy. Visits felt draining. And instead of safety, I felt emotional pressure. Slowly, the truth revealed itself. I was not broken. I was simply an empath living inside emotional chaos. And chaos, even when familiar, is still chaos. Living in emotionally unpredictable environments forces the nervous system into constant alertness. It becomes impossible to relax, impossible to feel fully safe, impossible to rest deeply. Every interaction requires monitoring. Every conversation demands awareness. Every silence demands interpretation. And over time, this emotional vigilance becomes unbearable. Love, once a source of hope, becomes a source of stress. And slowly, painfully, the heart begins to understand. Staying connected is hurting more than stepping away. Sensitivity is not weakness. It is a nervous system that processes the world more deeply than most. I did not simply notice emotions. I absorbed them. It felt as though my skin had no filter. Emotions passed through me freely, entering my body, lodging inside my chest, my stomach, my throat, my muscles. Anger became pressure in my chest, a tightening that made breathing difficult. Guilt became nausea in my stomach, a twisting sensation that lingered long after conversations ended. Sadness became heaviness in my limbs, a weight that made movement feel slow and effortful. Anxiety became trembling in my hands, a visible manifestation of internal fear. Every emotional shift in the room registered inside my body. Even before understanding language, I understood emotional tone. Silence carried weight. Voices carried danger. Energy carried truth. I sensed tension before arguments erupted. I noticed sadness before tears appeared. I felt anger before voices rose. Emotional undercurrents spoke louder than words, while others lived freely. I monitored emotional weather. Who was angry? Who was unstable? Who needed comfort? Who might explode? This constant scanning was not conscious. It was instinctive. It was survival. From childhood, emotional awareness became protection. In dysfunctional environments, this awareness transforms into hyper-alertness. Hyper-alertness means the nervous system never rests. It remains activated, always listening, always scanning, always scanning, always scanning, always preparing. It becomes emotional vigilance, a constant state of readiness, waiting for the next emotional storm. This kind of childhood teaches the body that safety is temporary, that calm is fragile, that peace is unstable. So relaxation becomes unfamiliar, rest becomes difficult, stillness feels unsafe. The nervous system remains trapped in survival mode long after danger has passed. This creates deep emotional exhaustion. Even in adulthood, calm environments feel strange. Silence feels suspicious. Peace feels temporary. And joy feels fragile. The body waits for disruption. Because chaos was normal and stability was rare, in these environments, emotional caretaking often becomes identity. Comforting others becomes habit. Managing conflict becomes instinct. Sacrificing personal needs becomes routine. And slowly, without realizing it, the empath disappears inside service. The self fades. The needs vanish. The voice quiets. Until one day, the nervous system begins to rebel. Fatigue sets in. Anxiety deepens. Emotional numbness appears. Burnout arrives, and the body finally demands what the mind long ignored. Safety, peace, distance. A young woman grows up watching her mother crumble under emotional distress. From a very early age, I could feel her sadness before she spoke. Her sighs carried weight. Her silence felt heavy. Her eyes reflected exhaustion that no child should have to witness. Even when she smiled, something behind it looked tired, wounded, and overwhelmed. My father was distant, emotionally unavailable, and deeply critical. His presence filled the room, but his warmth never did. Conversations filled the room, but his warmth never did. Conversations felt sharp, not gentle. His words were precise, not comforting. Approval was rare. Affection felt conditional. And slowly, I learned that emotional safety did not exist in his presence. My siblings fought constantly. The house never felt still. Voices rose easily. Anger lingered in the air. Tension lived in the walls. And somewhere between their conflicts and my parents' emotional struggles, I learned to disappear. So I became the glue. At 9 years old, I comforted my mother when she cried in the kitchen late at night. I wiped her tears. I listened to her worries. I tried to reassure her. My small hands held emotional weight far beyond their strength. At 12, I mediated arguments. I stepped between raised voices. I softened sharp words. I tried to bring peace where chaos ruled. I learned how to choose language carefully, how to phrase things gently, how to calm storms that were never mine to control. At 15, I became the family therapist. Everyone came to me with their pain, their anger, their frustrations. I listened, I absorbed, I advised. I carried emotional burdens far heavier than my age could handle. At 20, I felt 60. My body was young, but my nervous system was ancient. By the time I reached adulthood, I no longer knew who I was outside of service. My identity had become fused with caretaking. My worth felt tied to usefulness. My value felt tied to usefulness. My value felt connected to how much emotional weight I could carry. I did not recognize my own needs. I did not understand my own anger. I did not allow myself to feel resentment, because guilt overshadowed everything. I felt guilty for wanting rest, guilty for needing space, guilty for craving peace, guilty for imagining distance. Yet every visit left me drained for days. My body ached, my muscles tightened, my sleep shattered. My anxiety spiked, my thoughts raced, my heart felt heavy. No matter how much love I carried, no matter how much compassion I gave, no matter how deeply I tried to heal everyone, something inside kept breaking. Eventually, I realized something terrifying. My family was not safe for my nervous system. Not because they were evil, not because they were cruel, but because their unresolved pain spilled into my life endlessly. And that realization changed everything. Empaths do not cut contact easily. They stay far beyond healthy limits. I stayed through emotional neglect. I stayed through emotional neglect. I stayed through emotional neglect. I stayed through practice and promises. I stayed through silent treatment. I stayed through criticism. I stayed through guilt. I stayed through emotional abandonment because I understood pain. I saw the wounded child inside the parent. I saw the trauma behind their harsh words. I saw the fear beneath control. I saw insecurity beneath control. I saw insecurity beneath criticism. And because I could see those wounds, I excused behavior that slowly destroyed me. Understanding became self-betrayal. Compassion became self-neglect. Empathy became emotional imprisonment. I stayed because I feared abandonment, even when abandonment already existed emotionally. The idea of physical separation felt unbearable. Somewhere inside, the child still hoped for acceptance, approval, and love. I stayed because I feared guilt. Guilt whispered that leaving meant betrayal, that distance meant cruelty, that choosing myself meant selfishness. I stayed because I feared regret. What if something happened? What if I left and never got closure? What if I abandoned someone who truly needed me? I stayed because I feared being seen as heartless. Society praises endurance. It glorifies sacrifice. It romanticizes suffering in the name of family. And so I feared judgment. I stayed because I feared breaking cultural rules. Family loyalty was sacred. Obedience was expected. Boundaries were discouraged. Endurance was rewarded. But above all, I stayed because I feared becoming like those who hurt me. I feared that choosing myself would turn me cold. I feared that setting boundaries would make me cruel. I feared that distance would make me unloving. So I remained soft in environments that demanded armor, until the cost became unbearable. And until the goss became unbearable, until the body collapsed, until my soul began to suffocate, until staying felt like slow emotional death. Fatigue became constant, sleep became restless, my digestion collapsed, headaches appeared daily, anxiety became background noise, depression crept in quietly, my immune system weakened, pain surfaced without explanation, the body kept score, every unspoken emotion, every swallowed tear, every suppressed scream, every unmet need, it all accumulated. And when emotional stress became constant, my body created physical boundaries. Illness became escape. Fatigue became protection. Shutdown became survival. There were days when I physically could not move. Days when my chest felt tight for no reason. Nights when sleep refused to come. Moments when my heart raced without cause. And slowly, I began to understand my body was trying to save me. Many empaths only recognize the toxicity of their family when their health collapses, when staying literally begins to kill them, when survival becomes impossible, when the nervous system says, enough. It is not a single argument, not one betrayal, not one cruel sentence. It is accumulation, years of emotional neglect, years of being misunderstood, years of being misunderstood, years of explaining, years of hoping, years of hoping, years of forgiving, years of staying silent, until one day something simply goes numb, the fight disappears, the hope dissolves, the desire to explain fades, and clarity replaces longing. No matter how much I give, I will never be met. No matter how deeply I love, I will never be understood. No matter how hard I try, I will never belong in this emotional space. And in that moment, grief and clarity collide. Staying becomes heavier than leaving. Distance becomes less painful than connection, and the soul finally whispers, let go. Cutting off family is not freedom, it is mourning, it is grief. Not only for the people left behind, but for the dream of what could have been. I was not just losing people, I was losing the family I wished I had, the parents I hoped would change, the siblings I hoped would understand, the home I wanted to feel safe. This grief was complicated. There was sadness, relief, guilt, loneliness, anger, peace, all at once. And some days relief washed over me like sunlight. Other days guilt crushed my chest. Some nights loneliness echoed in silence. Other mornings peace felt sacred. And because society romanticizes family, this grief became isolating. Few understood, many judged, some condemned. But no one truly saw the decades that led to this moment. No one felt the exhaustion. No one carried the emotional weight. No one lived inside my nervous system. And so, healing had to happen quietly, internally, slowly, painfully, slowly, painfully. A man grows up in a household ruled by emotional volatility. His father explodes in rage. His mother manipulates through guilt. Every interaction becomes emotional warfare. As a child, I learned to read moods like weather patterns. I could sense storms before they arrived. I became hyper-alert, always scanning, always bracing, always waiting. I learned to walk softly, to speak carefully, to disappear when necessary, because emotional explosions were unpredictable. As an adult, every phone call spiked anxiety. Every visit triggered emotional shutdown. My body remembered what my mind tried to forget. One day I stopped answering. At first, the silence was unbearable. Guilt screamed, fear surfaced, loneliness echoed. But slowly, something remarkable happened. My nervous system began to breathe. My body relaxed. My sleep deepened. My thoughts slowed. My heart softened. For the first time, safety existed. And I realized something heartbreaking. Distance gave me the peace I never felt at home. Without constant emotional demands, identity begins to re-emerge. At first, this feels unfamiliar. almost unsettling. For years, life had been shaped around emotional survival. Every decision revolved around keeping peace, avoiding conflict, and managing emotional tension. My nervous system had grown accustomed to chaos, to constant alertness, to emotional labor that never ended. And suddenly that noise was gone. Silence filled the space, and in that silence, questions surfaced. Who am I without emotional labor? What do I want? What feels peaceful? What brings joy? These questions felt foreign, almost uncomfortable, because for so long, identity had been defined by service, by sacrifice, by endurance, by survival. Without those roles, I felt lost. There were moments of confusion, moments of emptiness, moments of doubt, moments when I wondered if I had made a mistake, when loneliness crept in, whispering that familiarity, even painful familiarity, might have been easier than uncertainty. But slowly, something remarkable began to happen. I started to notice small preferences. What kind of silence felt comforting? What kind of music soothed my nervous system? What kind of spaces brought calm? What kind of people felt safe? For the first time, my inner voice became audible. Boundaries began to strengthen. No longer did I feel obligated to explain every decision. No longer did guilt dictate my choices. No longer did fear shape my behavior. Self-respect began to grow. I started honoring exhaustion, listening to intuition, respecting emotional limits, valuing my own time. And slowly, the version of myself buried beneath years of emotional labor began to rise. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, gently, patiently. Learning healthy love empaths raised in emotional chaos often confuse love with suffering. For years, I believed love meant sacrifice, that love meant enduring pain, that love meant putting myself last, that love meant tolerating emotional neglect, that love meant staying even when it hurt. I confused intensity with intimacy because emotional unpredictability created heightened emotional states, and those states felt like connection. Calm relationships felt unfamiliar. Stability felt boring. Peace felt suspicious. I confused sacrifice with loyalty because self-erasure had been praised, because endurance had been glorified, because obedience had been rewarded. I confused endurance with devotion, because staying through suffering had been framed as strength. But distance began to rewrite these beliefs. It taught me that love should feel safe, not anxiety-inducing, not exhausting, not destabilizing. Love should feel calm. It should allow breath. It should allow rest. It should allow rest. It should allow authenticity. Connection should feel nourishing, not draining, not depleting, not suffocating. Belonging should feel peaceful, not conditional, not fragile, not uncertain. As I slowly built healthier relationships, I began to understand something profound. Real love does not require self-destruction. Real love does not demand emotional labor. Real love does not punish boundaries. Real love does not thrive on guilt. And slowly, my nervous system began to learn a new emotional language: safety, trust, consistency, respect, gentleness. This re-education took time. Years of emotional conditioning cannot be undone overnight, but each healthy interaction rewired something inside. Each calm conversation softened old defenses. Each respectful boundary strengthened inner stability, and gradually, love began to feel lighter. Silence allows reflection. Distance allows awareness. Space allows healing. With emotional noise removed, inner clarity emerges. At first, silence felt uncomfortable, because chaos had always been familiar. Stillness felt strange. Calm felt suspicious, but slowly, silence became sanctuary. In that silence, I began to reflect on patterns, on childhood wounds, on emotional conditioning, on intergenerational trauma, on inherited beliefs, on subconscious fears, and with reflection came awareness. I began to see emotional cycles clearly, to understand why certain patterns repeated, to recognize the ways pain had shaped perception. to see how survival had molded identity. And within that awareness, healing began. Not dramatic healing, not sudden breakthroughs, but slow, steady emotional unwinding. Breath by breath, day by day, moment by breath, day by day, moment. Intuition strengthened. Without constant emotional interference, inner guidance became clearer. I began trusting instinct again, listening to subtle emotional cues, following internal wisdom. Emotional intelligence deepened. I learned to differentiate between empathy and self-sacrifice, between compassion and self-neglect, between love and attachment. Purpose sharpened. Life slowly aligned with inner truth. And for the first time, existence felt intentional instead of reactive. Some nights felt unbearably quiet. Some holidays carried deep sadness. Some milestones felt hollow without familiar faces. Memories resurfaced unexpectedly. Grief returned in waves. There were moments of doubt, moments of deep emotional ache. But loneliness also created space. Space for new connections. Space for deeper friendships. Space for authentic relationships. Slowly, chosen family appeared. Friends who listened, partners who respected. Friends who listened, partners who respected. Communities who understood. People who saw emotional depth as strength, not inconvenience. People who valued honesty. People who welcomed vulnerability. And belonging transformed. Family became connection, not blood. Safety replaced obligation. Trust replaced fear. Love replaced endurance. And slowly, life began to feel whole again. They leave because self-respect begins. They leave because survival demands it. They leave because peace becomes sacred. They leave because staying means emotional death. They leave because the nervous system can no longer endure constant threat. They leave because the soul can no longer carry endless grief. They leave because the soul can no longer carry endless grief. They leave because life deserves to be lived, not merely survived. And in choosing distance, life finally begins. Not a perfect life, not a painless life, but a conscious life, a grounded life, a self-honoring life, a self-honoring life. Some wounds do not bleed, they ache, quietly, for years, invisible to the world, but deeply felt in the soul. They hide beneath forced smiles, behind polite conversations, under silent endurance, within exhausted hearts. And when an empath finally walks away, it is not rebellion, it is resurrection. It is the moment the soul whispers, enough. Enough endurance, enough silence, enough suffering, enough self-betrayal, enough self-betrayal, enough pretending, enough hoping, enough shrinking. And in that moment, a new life begins. Not perfect, not painless, but finally free. Free to breathe, free to rest, free to heal, free to become, free to exist without fear, free to love without losing oneself. And in that quiet rebirth, something profound unfolds. For the first time, life no longer feels like survival. It begins to feel like living. When emotional noise fades, silence becomes medicine. At first it feels uncomfortable. The nervous system searches for threat. Stillness feels foreign, but slowly, silence softens, breath deepens, sleep stabilizes, muscles relax, thoughts slow, the body relearns safety, and within this silence, reflection begins. Patterns become visible, wounds become understandable, triggers become recognizable, inner awareness sharpens, healing unfolds. Without constant emotional labor, identity begins to resurface, preferences reappear, desires awaken, boundaries strengthen, self-trust deepens. For the first time, life is not reaction, it is intention. The empath begins to build a life aligned with inner truth, Values clarify, passions emerge, creativity returns, joy becomes possible, distance rewires emotional understanding, love is no longer equated with suffering, connection is no longer confused with obligation, intimacy is no longer confused with obligation, intimacy is no longer mistaken for emotional chaos. Healthy love reveals itself as safety, consistency, respect, gentleness, and emotional presence. Boundaries become acts of self-respect, communication becomes honest, attachment becomes secure, and slowly the nervous system learns a new emotional language. Through healing, new connections emerge, friendships rooted in mutual care, partnerships built on respect, communities shaped by understanding. Belonging transforms from obligation into choice. Family becomes emotional safety, not genetic proximity. Healing does not require hatred. Distance does not require bitterness. Boundaries do not require bitterness. Boundaries do not require cruelty. Compassion remains, but no longer at the expense of self. Understanding continues, but without self-erasure. Love persists, but without suffering. When an empath walks away, it is not abandonment, it is resurrection. It is the moment the soul chooses life. Not a perfect life, not a painless life, but an authentic life. Not a painless life, but an authentic life. A life eroded in self-respect. A life aligned with inner truth. A life where breath is no longer held. A life where existence becomes living. And in that quiet rebirth, healing begins. Not as a destination, but as a way of being.